So to start this conversation, I think it would be useful to hear sort of a bit of context of why we're having this conversation in the first place. So maybe Nigel, it'd be good to hear a bit from you about like what the Wild West days of online video were like and why we had all the problems that we did have.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd like being the person to go to for that question. Perhaps I was orbiting some of those challenges, but I like to think successfully avoiding them. The thing that struck me, obviously, much like everybody here, I would imagine been to a lot of conferences. I watched the morning or the first session content here, which I thought was excellent. I thought that John's first panel, other than needling Channel 4 quite aggressively, the areas that he focused on with the challenges. So are people watching my ads? Is programmatic or data-driven advertising going to erode my CPM? Is there a value chain fragmentation? All of these challenges. I've been told for a long time, TV's different, TV's different, TV's different. But from a protocol perspective and the threats that are emerging to the existing TV and video market, if you compare it to the digital display market, just replace Channel 4 ITV with Guardian, News Corp, they're exactly the same. They're exactly the same challenges. There's obviously very different reasons, very different solutions. I think the challenges are exactly the same. In terms of why I think those existed in display, and let's say VOD, for example, or that digital video experience, probably the biggest contributing factor is the significant number of intermediaries. So you're talking about a display market that's only 10 to 15 years old, didn't really have any tools and systems associated with it. So largely, everybody was adopting different things, and then they're having to install a significant number of intermediaries into their buying and selling process. So that could be a DSP, it could be an SSP, it could be a measurement company, it could be a brand safety mechanism, it could be anything. And obviously you have a very fragmented experience. 400, 500 publishers you're dealing with versus TV, which only has 3 or 4. You've effectively got a value chain that you can't police, that you can't monitor, and the buyer and seller become too far away from each other, and essentially then a lot can go on in the middle. And in display, in a lot of cases, a lot did.
So then obviously when we're talking about like a drive towards premium, in part we're talking about sort of avoiding a lot of the dodgy practices that we have had in the past with online video, but in part as well we're talking about premium content. And so Christian, obviously Precise TV, you guys work with sort of helping advertisers select what you guys would describe as premium content on YouTube, but some people out there would say there is no premium content on YouTube, it's not a premium service. So is that like an outdated view, do you think?
It's a really good question, and I think that I've seen this question popping up over years. As you know, I've worked at Maker Studios, at Disney, and then I switched side to a broadcaster. So I've seen like kind of like both sides arguing about YouTube a lot. And I think that the question is really wrong, because the way we define premium video content is actually derived from a perception of production quality. And I hear that a lot, like it must be shiny, it has to be, you know, a lot of FX in it, it needs to be real talent, like a real talent, not what you're talking about, like a YouTube talent. And there's this perception that I've seen a lot, that those creators are behind a screen with a cheap webcam, and that's not the case, right? Professional teams in there, they have a staff, they have editing, they have all of that. And on top of that, what we see on YouTube, it's not just the typical vertical that where you have creators, right? You have Vivo, obviously highly premium. You have a lot of really good TV content, especially in the US market. I know the UK is lacking in terms of like uploading TV content, but there are many, many countries where you have premium TV content out there, highlight clips, that actually have mass reach beyond what your OTT platform can actually deliver. So the question of what is premium is key. And I think the production quality, forget about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think on that one it'd be interesting to hear, Adam, what your view on that is, because obviously coming from Sky, I don't know how Sky uses YouTube in terms of like whether you guys post clips or not, but like, do you think broadcast deserve, you know, we're starting to hear the use of BVOD, broadcast video on demand. Do you think that deserves to be in a level of its own, really? In terms of like premium content?
Reluctant to say a level of its own. Obviously, we believe that the premiumness, which I think is something Roli's going to reflect on from a buying perspective rather than us talking about ourselves as premium, which we obviously believe, but we'd like that validated. It's not just VOD, it's linear. Everything that we put out, we like to believe that it's premium. I'm just quite nervous about getting too hung up on the definition of that word, or whether it somehow excludes everybody that isn't premium, or everybody that isn't TV, or everybody that isn't broadcast. So, I mean, reflecting on the YouTube thing, I can't really comment too much on what Sky does and doesn't do on YouTube, but in terms of comparing YouTube to TV, I still think there's a significant gap between what you would find on YouTube, how you would find it, how it would arrive with you, and then how you would actually experience it as a customer, and what your expectations of what you find on YouTube are, as distinct from what you expect to see on something like Sky or another commercial broadcaster such as ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, Roli, from the buy side, how would you define premium?
I mean, coming from a buy side, I think that premium is in the eye of the beholder. I think that everyone has different kind of definition of what premium is. For some people, it could be like something very expensive. For others, it could mean kind of a high-end, product where kind of quality and longevity is at the heart of the product. And I think from a buyer's perspective, premium, if a website, or piece of content is viewed as a trusted source of information and has the relevant audience to a brand's target consumer, then for an advertiser, then that is premium content. I think we get so bogged down in saying, this is a premium website, but I think, with the immersion of, user-generated content now, I think premium is just the idea that a brand has now that, or the advertiser can now define what premium means for their brand.
So moving on to the three things we're really talking about today, we'll start with Ads.txt. Nigel, maybe you can give us a bit of a view on how successful have we been in getting publishers to adopt Ads.txt?
Yeah, I mean, Ads.txt is a bit of a success story for a couple of reasons. We can come on to how effective it's been, but the idea that you've got a trade body, in this instance, IAB, coming up with an initiative to solve a problem that's then been effectively, you could probably count it as universal adoption, certainly in a couple of their core markets, I think is amazing. There's not really very many examples where that's the case. Certainly be interesting to come onto the video market and what's required there. But the idea that the challenge of reselling, which is a pretty big challenge in display, when you've got just frankly limitless pool of impressions that you can buy and sell, then obviously buyers don't necessarily know what they're getting, and frankly, because they're using data as a proxy to what they're buying anyway, they're taking a lot of risks. But in this instance, Ads.txt has certainly acknowledged the problem. Publishers have realized that problem, and then buyers have therefore acknowledged Ads.txt as a really, really good solution for the market. Will it scale? Does it actually solve the root cause of the problem? No, because the root cause of the problem really is that buyers are essentially using software to make their purchasing and planning decisions. In a lot of cases, not in every case. Roli's going to punch me in a minute if I keep going down this path here. But in a lot of cases, that's what they're doing. They're feeding it into a DSP and saying, you choose where I buy. And Ads.txt kind of makes sure that there is a level of safety associated with that now. But the real problem is they shouldn't do that. They should actually choose where they want to run and just leverage the automation and the targeting that the DSP can provide instead of just letting it make all the decisions. So yes, on one hand, it's a plaster.
I mean, I think there's governance when it comes to, even within programmatic, and you're buying across 1,000 sites. I don't think it's true that, we just go in and we just buy across 1,000 sites. There are measures that you put in place to ensure that you are as safe as you can possibly be within a programmatic environment, Nigel.
I
mean...
She threatened me backstage as well before we came out.
I did. I did do kickboxing in my spare time, so I did tell him that afterwards I'll be having words. Yeah. Anyways, I think there are measurements they're in place. And, with Ads.cert next year when that comes into play, I mean, it's not just only about verifying that a business is now licensed to sell inventory, but ultimately we're going to have to authenticate the supply chain within that real-time bidding environment. And that would ultimately boost buyers' confidence, in RTB. So we're not just buying blind. There's so many measures. You AppNexus, you know this. I mean, your platform still is all about, use my technology to ensure. And when you use my technology, we're integrated with all these verification partners. We can do all these nice things for you. So I think the issue post Ads.txt, post GDPR, was no one was really looking at this topic. I think everyone just took a step back, and in the past, in the early stages of RTB, it was all about ad exchanges not being safe, ad networks flooding the ad exchanges with less than ideal inventory, to talking about the premium inventory in there, and then obviously with the scandals that we've had with YouTube and Facebook has really forced us technology-wise, publisher side, agency-wise, to have a look and have these conversations and introduce guidelines that further enforce these things and make sure that we're safe.
Yeah, of course I do agree. Yeah. On one hand, because I'm slightly scared. Yeah. But on the other hand, because people are starting to take a lot greater interest, of course, in where their ads are running, rather than just where they're not running. But there's no question that certainly in display, because of the proliferation of impressions and because of the volume that people can buy, they've used the data as a proxy, so they're targeting the user, not the content. So that's also one of the reasons I think that the user experience has eroded, and the overuse of data has unsettled consumers a little bit. And obviously we're all consumers, so we're very much in the area of subjectivity now. That you're getting an ad based on something you've done previously, not based on what you're looking at in the moment. That also does erode the experience for the advertiser. By far the most effective source of targeting in terms of conversions outside of levels of retargeting is contextual. Essentially meaning, is the ad I'm looking at relevant to what I'm reading? Doesn't mean sport equals I want to buy football boots, but am I reading football in the moment, or how much football content do I consume? Because you want the ad to be relevant to what you're watching. You don't just want it to be relevant to you, something you did previously. So let's agree to disagree a little bit. I think that there's levels of both. But yeah, I think there's certainly the behaviour's improving.
I think on Ads.txt is a very direct response to the Wild West, and I'm somebody who spent most of my career in digital, relatively fresh into TV. I think it was absolutely the right response, because I think what it's trying to kill is the secondary market or touting of inventory by people who are absolutely not authorised to be representing you. They're effectively stealing something that you're trying to put into market, stealing your product, selling it at a cut-down price, deliberately, fraudulently misrepresenting the very thing they're actually selling. Anything at all that mitigates that, and it may not necessarily completely destroy it, has got to be a good thing, irrespective of whether you're in digital or whether you're in TV. It's not the sexiest brand in the universe, and it's actually an incredibly simple piece of technology, but it's already having quite a far-reaching effect. And if it changed the perception that digital media in particular is subject to this massive level of fraud and arbitrage, it's got to be a good thing, even if it is, at the moment, probably a bit tactical in nature. Ad.cert, I think, is a strategic move towards blockchain, ultimately, and I think that's absolutely where the industry will land in a few years' time. We're looking at it, we're very, very interested in that. Our inventory is incredibly valuable to us, and as I'm sure it is to everybody who's in TV and everyone who's in everywhere. But it's in a highly constrained environment, the pricing is generally quite high. Going back to premium, anything we can do to mitigate the risk of that inventory being fraudulently appearing where it shouldn't be, or having the wrong ads running, we're always going to look at that, and we're going to embrace that, I think.
I mean, how big a deal is it in terms of the wider, the scale of fraud that goes on? Like, how big a blow to that is Ads.txt?
I don't know the statistic. I think probably you guys will be closer to that, but I think it's definitely had an impact. It should be having a significant impact very rapidly. If people are using it properly and they're respecting it, then yeah.
Fraudsters are very creative people. There's usually a way around it, but it's a question of really the only real way to stop fraud is to stop the flow of money into fraudulent environments. So really, it's just a question of how much relationship you can drive between the buyer and the seller. And the more they know about each other, where is my money coming from and where's my money going to, it becomes much harder for fraudsters to operate in that kind of environment.
By its very nature, unfortunately, you can't see whether it's fraudulent. I think that's the trick.
Yeah, back to the fragmented value chain then.
Yeah. From a buyer's perspective, what kind of risk are you guys running there? I mean, how do you actually say to yourself, that doesn't look, I know it's software, but how you actually plan to try and avoid buying fraudulent?
We look to the likes of AppNexus to help in that respect. When you're using technologies, I mean, when you're using a DSP or you're choosing a DSP, making a DSP selection or a tech selection, I think the onus is not just only on the buyer side, but also on the technology partners to make sure they have tools in place that help us deliver our ads in a safe environment. Now, nothing is 100%. We can have, conversations today, next year, and in 10 years. But I don't think we can ever get to that 100% level where we say, yeah, whatever technology that we use, then our ads are going to be completely 100% guaranteed, to be in a safe environment. I think the only guarantee in place is when you have the one-on-one relationship with a publisher. The old days of buying media where you have the direct IO buy, I want my ad to be served, in your, homepage in this section, and this is it, I'm going to give you, $100,000 for this. I think, with programmatic, with the fact that, you are thinking about getting more scale and reaching more users, and it's all about data, then we're never going to be at 100%. But we rely on our, tech providers, and we rely on ourselves and as an industry to come up with solutions that would help us kind of get to that point.
And I think that this is also a good point, because Ads.txt and GDPR both are really good for the industry, because advertisers and brands for the first time actually think about the deep supply chain they have in front of it. And I think one of the issues of the years in programmatic was really like the total focus on only audience buying. And like beefing up your DMP, beefing it up with second-party, third-party data, where you don't even know what exactly you're buying. Essentially, who is behind the screen was less relevant in the past because you had no control over visibility of what actually you were buying. I mean, of course, there are exceptions if you do programmatic guaranteed, if you do programmatic direct, but I'm talking about the main spend, which is actually going through DSPs, and it's not really contextually relevant. And you were talking about, for the consumer, he's not really interested in what he has done in the past, what he's searched for. Because think about the device sharing, what we also see on YouTube. One device, my kids use my iPad. I'm logged in, my wife screws up my search history, like my kids screw them up, right? And I see absolutely the wrong ads all the time. Either retargeted, right? For Nerf guns, all the time. No, sorry, Nerf guns, that doesn't work. But retargeted for holidays or yoga retreats, and then contextually being served, Nerf guns. The whole thing is really screwed up. And I think that what we see now is actually a completely new mindset in the industry. And that's actually good, because coming from the TV days, you were buying spots, right? You were bidding like $1 million for a Super Bowl. And what we see is, coming back to the quality that I was talking about earlier, I define premium video as what is authentic and relevant and engaging to the consumer. So instead of like, not a bias perspective, not a perspective from a publisher side, I am concerned about who is behind the screen, and they might be watching a how-to video, or it could be a creator on YouTube, but it's so relevant for them how they prepare the coffee. Because we have done a really interesting study with a coffee appliance company, a global brand that we work for. And we have seen that the brand lift that we measure on every media buy on YouTube that we have was 124% uplift on a how-to video on YouTube versus a Gordon Ramsay placement. And this is, of course, multiplied across thousands of impressions. And this is actually the new premium I was referring to in the beginning. It's more subjective and is less objective.
Does that mean there is no premium then that we can all settle on as an industry, and that we should toss the word out the window and look at it in a case by case? Because that's, I think,
premium surely comes from, it must come also from the level of packaging and the way that you can actually present something. And again, if we hark back very briefly to the situation that we've been faced with in digital, and anybody here who works in display or has worked in display will know this, that the problems have caused because the money has been shifting. Money is shifted out of, we'll pick on newspapers again for an example. That's always regarded as a very premium environment. High viewability, high brand safety, good contextual relevance, good service, good packaging, and so on. Probably good reporting, all of those things that you would associate. Because there has been some kind of shift in consumers to aggregation services like Facebook, like Instagram, to some extent like YouTube. What's tended to happen is, because of big budgets have shifted there, the data that's further up the funnel has been used as a proxy for what they buy across the rest of the internet. And that's become a big part of the problem. And as a result, these publishers that have then seen their value eroding, the money eroding, have effectively said yes to the majority of services that will come to them. Someone will pop up and say, I'm a contextual business, implement my tags and you'll make more money. Oh, I'm a verification business, implement my tags and you'll be able to sell for a higher CPM. I'm a native business, implement my tags. Next thing you know, you end up with a site with 50 tags in it. You don't know who's selling it, Ads.txt problem. You end up with 50 different companies with data from that page. So then the consumer gets targeted in various different ways all across the internet. You end up with the GDPR legislation, which is probably good if it's implemented correctly, which of course leads to these things too. So a lot of it is this fragmentation of where people then ultimately buy from. And I firmly believe that a lot of this has to rest with the buyer. We talked a bit about this backstage. The publishers, the sellers, and ultimately I do believe, like you can get lynched afterwards, that TV, even the premium broadcasters have this coming. This is coming because people are viewing video elsewhere. And then all of a sudden the measurement that exists elsewhere is going to start usurping measurement that exists on regular TV. Pretty sure Google thought that everyone would be watching TV on YouTube by now. The fact that's not the case, the fact there is Amazon, there is Facebook, and there is Netflix is a very good thing because they keep each other honest. But the challenge, of course, is for the folks that have something to lose. And so they need to be careful of their supply chain and deal with the buyers who have to take a responsibility about where things are running.
So, yeah, I'd like to start looking like specifically at sort of the brand safety scandals that we've had in the past couple of years. So, obviously, most people in the audience, I'm sure, will have seen everything that was going on YouTube specifically. We had, these stories CNN was reporting that a bunch of advertisers were having their ads run on Korean propaganda, North Korean propaganda, on white supremacist content, on content promoting pedophilia. And at the same time as those sorts of weird parts of YouTube, you've got these like mainstream channels like PewDiePie and Logan Paul who started putting out content that advertisers found to be problematic. So just in terms of seeing how much those scandals have shaken, advertisers' confidence. I mean, Christian, it'd be interesting to hear from you how many, the response you've seen from brands in terms of wanting to come and make sure they're putting their money into safe content.
Right, yeah. I think tragedy is following me. It's a bad thing. I've been at Maker and Disney when PewDiePie happened, and I sat on the board of Studio 71. Logan Paul happened earlier. So started my own business. I hope that it will not happen again. And I think the brand safety issues, of course, they have been in one way blown up by some publishers as well, right? Making headlines on Sunday Times. But they've been around for some years, right? It's kind of like odd to see them popping up after so many years. The reality is that, yes, brands became much more sensitive, and there are several layers of actually how you can tackle this. And I can tell you, you can absolutely buy premium and you can buy 100% brand safe on YouTube. It's working, right? There are several layers. There's IES, for example, as a base layer. There's double verify, just to get the verification right. Then there are ways of buying channels, right? There are whitelists from Google, Google Preferred. There are some suppliers that actually give you the channels. So the second layer. What we do, and this is interesting because we work in the kids space quite a lot. We've become the first global COPPA-compliant, FTC-approved provider for YouTube, which is actually a US legislation dealing with privacy for children advertisers. That what we have seen is essentially there is no control if you don't control the video you're buying. So it really needs to be the spot buying, what I was talking about, like the Super Bowl. Because control is directly proportional to video and the placements. Controlling the inventory controls your brand safety. And what we have seen is there's a correlation between actually what content you're running and the view-through rate that actually comes automatically, which is higher because you're running video level and relevant content. It also affects the brand awareness. And every CMO should be concerned about where their ads are being viewed. Again, the paradigm shift I was actually thinking about a lot was like, talk about publisher, we talk about, what the content actually was, how premium the content production house was. For me, it's really about who is behind the screen. And I think that brand safety can be tackled, but not many brands and agencies are fully aware of how to do it and what the actually flip side is, for example, if you just run pure audience or pure channel. And I think it's an education in the market.
I'll just throw one thing. I was just thinking about this premium thing again. I think the massive difference between YouTube, between Google, Facebook, and with TV is regulation. So the thing that I think puts a certain level of premiumness into television is we're very heavily regulated, and rightly so, and the impacts of us breaking any of those regulations are absolutely severe from a broadcasting perspective, let alone an advertising perspective. So I'd like to throw it back out to the panel that maybe one definition of premium is that there's a regulatory body that is making sure that your behaviours are controlled, and there are penalties and consequences to bad acting and bad behaviour. So I think we love that about TV. I think that gives us a great sell to advertisers. You know that we are heavily motivated to do the right thing. And I would argue that maybe in the other environments, that lack of regulation is what allows the bad acting to propagate. There is no way to stop people doing the wrong thing in there.
Really, what would you say? Like, so we've heard a few views from broadcast and from Slice TV. Like, what's the buy side view post all these YouTube brand safety scandals? Has that shaken confidence, and how confident is the buy side in solutions which say that they can sort of fix these problems?
I don't think that confidence was necessarily shaken. I think that we had a pause and reset moment. Like I mentioned earlier, everyone, when it comes to programmatic, was talking more about data, as Nigel said. It was about data, driven targeting. And then when the scandals happened, I think brands were now forced to kind of engage more deeply with their agencies and with their campaigns. I think they're all technology providers, publishers, everybody wanted to know what we're doing within the space. Yes, sometimes some brands pulled budgets from some platforms, but I think that just allowed them to have a look at what we were doing with their campaigns and what we're doing with what technology partners we were working with, what verification partners we were working with as well. I don't think that it has stopped data-driven targeting. I don't think that it's been an impact for sure, but it's the reason we're sitting on this stage and having this conversation, and that's kind of partly as a result of the scandals that we've had.
Interesting. I mean, does the buy side have a view on, Adam's talking about the need for regulation?
I wasn't saying we need it. I'm just
Well,
saying
not
that I'd hesitate to say that's room for digital people, but I think it's a very clear difference between the two environments. The other one being obviously that supply is highly constrained in television.
I thought we're regulated with the GDPR laws and the IAB with Ads.txt and Ads.set, and I thought we were regulated. I think, yes, there needs to be enforcement. I think that, yes, we have regulation in place, but there's not really like that much of an enforcement when it comes to these guidelines that have been put in place. For Ads.txt, it's just a guideline to say, yes, you need to implement these files on your site so that we know that this, this business is verified or licensed to sell your inventory. But who's enforcing that? When does that come into enforcement? If you don't do this, is anything going to happen to that publisher? I think from a buy side, then Publicis Media actually ensures that all publishers within our private marketplace have Ads.txt files. I mean, that's what we do. But who's controlling that from other companies? There is no regulatory arm to say, or to enforce these regulations or these guidelines.
Well, not only that, regulation doesn't cover brand safety.
Okay.
And brand safety is probably one of the biggest concerns for any advertiser. In actual fact, it really should be table stakes. I mean, certainly an advertiser, if you told them that their ad might not be viewed, it's a bit ridiculous. The idea that you're going to buy something and someone might not see it, it's kind of crazy. You're going to spend this money. So I think brand safety is obviously one of the most important in terms of the things to be challenged. We talked about brand adjacency actually in TVs, where it's being slightly different when you're watching a video, because you could be watching a movie that does have a lot of blood and guts in it, or a lot of killing, or a lot of unsavory adult content, but people will still advertise in those breaks. If you had that content on the web and you had an advert next to it, everyone would be up in arms.
But that is heavily regulated
so the rules,
TV then.
Okay,
heavily
fair. So the rules are very different, and
Yeah.
certainly there's times, there's watersheds and things like that. But I think what you have to remember is, of course, the legislation isn't applying to everyone. So your definition of premium, I think I largely agree with, which is this idea where you can assume brand safety by default.
Yeah, that's the goal.
The simple fact that company operates in that arena means that they have to adhere to certain rules. And it comes back to the idea of contextual. Are you actually advertising as relevant content? Contextual, of course, being I don't have shares in any contextual businesses, by the way, if someone's wondering. But it's also behavioural, non-personally identifiable information, so it's GDPR compliant as well. Probably one of the best untapped opportunities. I'm going to go and get Dave Morgan to invest in something after this. Next business.
So coming on to our last 3 topics, that clock there says 0, but started off with 10 minutes less, so I'm taking another 10. GDPR.
I thought we were finished.
Okay.
No, not even close.
Keep thinking.
A lot of people just looked very unsettled.
Yeah. It's not gone down well, Tim. It's not gone down well at all.
It's his idea. It's his idea.
Yeah, I was ready to go.
So well, we have to cover GDPR. It's been huge. So I guess sort of as briefly as you can be about the topic. How big of an impact has it had so far, or maybe will it have when we start seeing like rulings made?
I mean, I remember, I don't know if you guys, I hope everyone in this room is old enough to remember the Millennium Bug, when it was like, December 31st, 1999, the world was going to come to an end, right? And the clocks were going to stop at 000, and, we're all not supposed to be here. We should have been dead by now. And I also remember, I mean a bit of an exaggeration when it comes to that analogy, but I also remember going to M&S to change some money, just to change a simple transaction, take some dollars, change to pounds for me. And they were like, I have to ask you some questions. Are you okay with M&S storing your data? I'm like, what? And then they asked me a list of questions. We have to do this before we can make this transaction. And I'm like, is this as a result of GDPR? And I was told, yes. I think, we've all been affected by GDPR. All companies have been affected by GDPR. I would argue that, yes, there was a bit of kind of like panic pre the implementation of GDPR. But if you think about what's happened post-GDPR, there's not been that much of an impact. Data-driven targeting still exists. I mean, yes, it's reduced the supply chain, and publishers have been forced to look at their supply chain, DPAs have had to be signed. Everyone has had to, legitimate interest has also remained as well. But I think that, we've panicked, but it's been a good, guideline or regulation for our industry, but I think we just over-panicked. And this enforcement is actually okay. What would you have to say, Nigel, to that?
Staying out
Well,
of this
nothing now.
I'd help him out.
What she said. I didn't know you could change money at M&S. I might go and do that.
You can.
I didn't know that.
Now you can.
I also didn't know they need your personal data to do it.
They do. They need your passport as well.
Who's using
cash?
Oh, she's using cash as well.
She's using cash?
Well, he lives in a parallel universe.
No, I just moved from
Quite
Dubai.
terrifying.
So I would, look, very quickly, I would argue GDPR has cleaned up the supply chain, which is good, really good. There's enormous breadth of interpretation about how it's been implemented. It's not really the concern. GDPR has been around for a really long time. A lot of people might forget that. It's a very old piece of legislation. This was just an update because they didn't think people had implemented it properly or taken it seriously. And I'm not sure that everyone's taking the update seriously either. The big one is e-privacy, by far. That's coming. I was at an IB Europe event in Milan a few months ago even, and we had the MEP who was responsible for pushing this forward, an Italian chap. And he said, we're going to use e-privacy as a way of channeling all of the updates that we got wrong when we implement GDPR, i.e. basically saying this isn't going to be perfect. I'm not suggesting the world is going to end then either. This is not a millennial moment. But there's going to be a much better balance in terms of the people who can collect data, what kind of data you can collect and how you can use it. Because the previous interpretation of GDPR favors those with login and registration data. And then, of course, the risk is that becomes the layer that you use to buy the rest of the internet. So certainly people are jarring registrations for themselves. That's a really good thing. But we don't know. It is actually the answer that I would give you. It's done some good things.
Okay. I mean, what's your guys' opinion on, like, one of the questions people are asking is, has it just played into the hands of Facebook and Google? Has it or not?
Massively, right? It's my opinion, if you look at the industry, the losers, I mean, there have been some US companies like Drawbridge that were using probabilistic data and were heavily depending on opt-in data, just pulled out of Europe altogether, although they are heavily funded, right? So they knew actually with e-privacy coming and GDPR that the retargeting space is under heavy pressure in Europe at the moment.
It's given the control to the publisher. Of course, they can choose.
That's right.
Who's reselling it. There's parallels with Ads.txt there as well.
Yeah.
So publishers are actually, no, I didn't know half of you were on my list.
Honestly believe that not every publisher, but many publishers have just started too late in the game to collecting opt-ins. The UK is leading the space. If you talk about Channel 4 or ITV Hub, they all have massive numbers of registrations where they have opt-ins, but they also have deterministic data of targeting audiences. So they're in good shape. But we were talking about the fragmented market. What about all the 1,000 publishers you're buying today, right? Not just the big ones, the big four. Plus Facebook and Google obviously has the opt-in anyway. So I think it really depends on the country. But the winners of GDPR are probably Facebook, Google, but also ITV and Channel 4, because they have started early collecting registrations. And the losers are probabilistic ad tech companies, US-based, and probably the thousands and thousands and thousands of publishers out there that you're buying today through AppNexus or through your trading desk, where you have no opt-in and no data.
Where it goes is ideally a system, probably at a market level, possibly even using new technologies like blockchain and so on, which I usually try to not use these kind of words, where users can actually then manage their own preferences and their data centrally, and then use that regardless of what they buy. Obviously, Google would like it to be them, Facebook would like it to be them, Amazon would like it to be them. But that's probably inappropriate. Certainly if you're a media owner or a large advertising, you probably wouldn't want that. There are good initiatives in the UK like Ozone for the national publishers. I don't think EBX would solve it because it's pan-European and legislation prohibits that going across market. Certainly ITV Channel 4, possibly Sky, doing something like that together to allow people like us to manage our preferences about what we see and don't see by way of advertising on TV is where it should go.
So we do have that, obviously, because we're pay TV, so we have that built into our customer contract. So we were pretty well prepared for GDPR as a result.
Just got to get the other two to use yours then.
Yeah, well, I mean, can't comment on that, obviously. We'd like to think our stuff's pretty good. But yeah, I think the broadcasters we are collaborating, obviously, in other areas, sort of straying slightly off topic. But what we're doing with Virgin Media is a very clear statement of intent about how we and they and the industry sees addressability. And a lot of the things that we're talking about today are a really, really important part of that. We need to give buyers an alternative to having to put all their budget in one particular place. And the things we talked about today, I think, are an incredibly important part of that conversation because it is built into our contracts, it is built into our technology. So I think it's interesting. I'm not sure if GDPR is completely brilliant for Google and Facebook. I think the people that should own the data are the customers. That ultimately the end journey for this will be that me and all of you and everyone in this room owns their own data and has complete visibility about where it is being used and for what purpose, and they have the right to yank it anytime that they want. And conversely, to give it anytime they want. So I don't ever really want to see Google and Facebook owning my data or indeed anyone else's, or Sky for that matter, or any company.
Right, but also I was calling it the age of relevance, especially triggered by the acquisition of Grapeshot by Oracle. Yeah. And contextual targeting. Grapeshot has been around for years, right? And suddenly Oracle comes around. So I called that the age of relevance because suddenly probabilistic targeting based on contextual environments is the hottest topic again. And there are not many companies out there doing it. And what we have seen is wow, actually we have people calling us saying can you help me doing this contextually without having consent, in my DMP? And we've been doing this for years now in the kids space, right? Because we cannot handle any data, personal information data, on children. There's no retargeting, there's no DMP. We do not have any of this, right? So whoever has been in the space of children advertising or kids advertising, they've been prepared for GDPR for many, many years because there was never ever an audience buy or retargeting or DMP or data enrichment or you name it.
We'd better wrap up the conversation there, otherwise the events team are going to kill me. But that was a really interesting conversation, and we had a good bit of debate, which is what I live for as a moderator. So thank you very much to our panelists.
Thanks.